The true terror of a disappearance does not lie in the initial shock or the chaos of the immediate aftermath. It resides instead in the long, unsettling quiet that inevitably settles once the media caravans have departed and the neighborhood watch banners have been taken down. It is the silence of the archival vault, the absolute, cold stillness that follows an investigation. This investigation, despite robust resources and profound dedication, finds itself unable to move forward or backward. This is the moment when a frantic, vibrant search transmutes into a cold case, a spectral file frozen in bureaucratic amber, leaving the spectral outlines of the vanished etched forever onto archived evidence boxes and fading newspaper clippings. We are examining 5 specific incidents where massive investigative efforts, marked by relentless searches, expensive technology, and promising early leads, abruptly ceased. These closures did not stem from solved mysteries or the discovery of remains, but from the simple, unbearable weight of ambiguity, a forensic dead end so final. The system itself had no choice but to drop the active pursuit. The first case unfurls deep within the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific Northwest forest, a region defined by its colossal, ancient trees and its perpetually damp, green silence. This landscape is a realm of verticality, where the forest floor is a chaotic mat of decay and new growth, and the light struggles to penetrate the dense canopy, casting the ground in a perennial twilight. It was here that amateur hiker Silas Thorne vanished. Silas was reported missing after failing to return from a planned 3-day trek through an area known locally as the Emerald Labyrinth. Initial concerns quickly escalated into a high-priority search. Recognizing that the area's weather could turn lethal quickly, and that every hour increased the risk exponentially, the logistical challenge was immediate. Mapping and searching this specific terrain was akin to searching a sunken ship in a sea of mud and moss. The first week was a whirlwind of noise and organized chaos. Search and rescue deployed high-tech thermal imaging from specialized low-flying helicopters. The repetitive, grinding rotor noise became the monotonous soundtrack to the investigation, churning the damp air above the treetops. Below, hundreds of dedicated volunteers, clad in bright water-resistant gear, combed through the saturated underbrush. The air was thick and heavy, saturated with the powerful, pungent scent of damp earth, decaying hemlock, and sharp, fresh pine needle decay. Every step was a physical struggle, the slick mud grabbing boots, the vine maple branches whipping back with sudden force. Investigators moved in tight grid patterns, shouting call and response codes, hoping for the slightest deviation in the landscape, a ripped piece of fabric, a misplaced water bottle, hoping for anything artificial in this overwhelming natural environment. Early leads were plentiful but misleading. A broken energy bar wrapper found near a stream, footprints that could not be conclusively dated,
and an abandoned campsite that later proved to belong to another group.
The hope was pinned on Silas's last known equipment list, a bright orange backpack, a distinctive blue tent, and a satellite phone. None of these primary items surfaced. The search stretched from 7 days to 14, then to a full month, transforming from a rescue operation into a recovery effort. Finally, it became a systematic, exhaustive sweep designed to locate any possible item of clothing or gear. The discovery that ultimately halted the investigation was, ironically, the one piece of physical evidence found. Deep in a ravine, half buried beneath a layer of slick, decaying leaves, a volunteer discovered a single, worn leather hiking boot. The sight of it sent a jolt of energy through the exhausted search crew. It was Silas's boot, confirmed by size and the distinctive wear patterns the man himself had noted when he purchased them. The boot was handled with immense care, sealed in a sterile evidence bag, and rushed to the state forensic lab.
Hope hinged entirely on what this object might tell them.
Could they find a trace of blood, a specific fiber from an unknown attacker? Or perhaps residual soil DNA that pointed toward a specific, uncharted microlocation? The results, when they arrived weeks later, delivered the definitive blow. The worn leather boot was saturated with groundwater and chemicals naturally released by the intense organic breakdown of the forest floor. It was forensically clean, or rather, forensically contaminated by nature itself. The interior yielded no traceable human DNA that wasn't degraded beyond recognition. The exterior mud was generic PNW loam. There were no defensive scuffs, no unique trace elements that suggested a struggle, nor any sign of forced entry into a structure. It was merely a boot, shed or lost, lying in the cold heart of the wilderness. With the exhaustion of all possible physical avenues and the utter failure of the only piece of identified evidence to provide a vector for continuation, the exhaustive, expensive aerial and ground searches were officially called off. The case was formally downgraded to an unresolvable missing persons file. The hundreds of pages of daily search logs, the drone footage, and the disheartening forensic report were boxed and labeled, left to rest in the cold storage facility. The silence returned to the emerald labyrinth, heavier now, punctuated only by the drip of moisture from the needles. The forest had swallowed Silas Thorne whole, and the machinery of justice, having used every tool at its disposal, could not retrieve him. Our focus shifts now from the boundless isolation of the wilderness to the claustrophobic density of the American urban landscape. Specifically, a bustling Midwestern city defined by its towering glass and steel architecture. This is the stage for the disappearance of Maya Lin, a diligent college student known for her meticulous scheduling and commitment to routine. Maya vanished from a busy downtown street corner on a Tuesday evening, mere blocks from her apartment. She vanished after leaving a late study session at the university library. 100 desperate footsteps echoed under the stark overhead light, carving out individual isolation within the dense, indifferent current of the rush hour. Unlike the hiker, Maya was surrounded by witnesses, infrastructure, and, crucially, technology. The initial investigation was a sprawling, intense endeavor focused entirely on exploiting the city's vast network of surveillance infrastructure. Detectives established a perimeter based on Maya's last known ping and began the meticulous, soul-crushing work of reviewing security footage. The investigation team was headquartered in a temporary operations room, a landscape of sickly green monitor glow. The constant low hum of servers and the rhythmic clicking of computer mice as analysts processed endless hours of data. Maya was captured briefly, a fleeting shadow, on a single grainy surveillance camera mounted high above a convenience store entrance. The footage showed her waiting patiently at the crosswalk at 11:37 p.m. She was looking down at her phone, her distinctive red coat a small splash of color against the monochromatic concrete backdrop. Then she walked into the frame of a second camera, past a newsstand, and turned the corner. The sodium glare highlights the street corner, but the wet pavement only mirrors the absolute void that opens at the alley's mouth. The investigative effort became a microscopic analysis of those few seconds. Who else was on that street? Detectives meticulously processed weeks of confusing timestamps and blurry footage. They were creating a massive, digitized map of every vehicle, pedestrian, and loiterer within 3 blocks of the point of vanishing. They interviewed bus drivers, street vendors, late-night restaurant staff, and even reviewed data from rideshare apps in the vicinity. The investigation hit its first significant barrier when the timeline, reconstructed with painstaking effort, revealed a 5-minute gap. This gap existed between the last positive sighting of Maya and the next available camera angle down the street. It was in this small, temporal void that the event, whatever it was, must have occurred. Then, a break. A key witness emerged. Mr. Jeffrey Hayes, an older man working the night shift at a nearby print shop, reported seeing a dark sedan idling near the corner, and described a brief, muffled altercation involving a woman in a red coat and two figures near the mouth of an alleyway. His testimony, delivered with conviction and detail regarding the model of the sedan and the approximate height of the figures, was the backbone of the investigation. It shifted the trajectory from a simple missing person case to a potential abduction, launching a massive hunt for the specific vehicle described. For 3 months, the focus was relentless. The sprawling map of interviews and potential suspects expanded, drawing in individuals with criminal records related to illicit passenger transport and violent crime. Warrants were issued, background checks run, and countless hours were spent cross-referencing Mr. Hayes' description with registered vehicles in the Tri-County area. A look of cautious optimism conferred the strategy. They were ready to move. The gavel had fallen, but this was louder. The Hayes testimony folder was closed, sealing the truth with a definitive, shocking force. Mr. Hayes, subjected to further intensive interview sessions aimed at refining the details of the sedan, began to falter. He tried to form the sound, but the entire confession collapsed inward before it could be released. Under the harsh light of the interrogation, Mr. Hayes finally broke, burying his secrets and his face in his hands. He admitted that due to the low light, his failing vision, and the pressure of recalling specific details months later, the shadows swallowed the details, leaving only the distorted silhouette of two figures caught in a desperate argument. He confessed that the guilt of not having been able to provide help at the time had subconsciously pushed him to provide the specific details. It wasn't just a wrong turn, it was the end of the road. His last good lead had just evaporated. The strategy dissolved in an instant of pure rage, all the plans scattered across the unforgiving floor. Without the specific details of the sedan and the alleged struggle, the critical 5-minute timeline gap became insurmountable. The entire structure of the plan was violently torn apart. Behind the intricate logic, only a blank wall remained. Every warrant, every suspect profile, and every lead generated by the dark sedan description suddenly became irrelevant. The precise blueprint dissolves. Every line of the grand design surrendered to the gritty, unforgiving flow of time. In the cold blue silence of the deserted ops room, the empty chair slowly spins, witness to an operation long concluded. The search was over. Both the interviews and the surveillance logs were finally blank. The evidence room contained thousands of hours of video and hundreds of interview transcripts. A dead end confirmed in crimson ink. The critical identifier was simply not found in the archives. The indifferent heart of the city pulses on, a blur of saturated light and heavy traffic sweeping through the rush hour canyon. The cold steel shelf accepted the heavy box of Lynn M., filing away its contents forever in the permanent dark. The crowd rushed past, but in the chaos, I saw her, a ghost in red, swept away by the current of the night. The third disappearance takes us thousands of miles away, trading the saturated green of the forest and the echoing canyons of the city for the oppressive stillness. Under the cruel sun, the horizon is endless and unforgiving. Here, the silence is heavier than the heat. The house sat silent beneath the relentless desert sun, the parked pickup the only sign of life that had suddenly vanished. Beyond this rusted wire, the federal land preserve stretches endlessly into the hazy desert, a prohibited expanse of vast, untouched wilderness. The scene discovered by the local sheriff's deputy was one of profound, eerie tranquility. The homestead seemed frozen in the act of living. The air was dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and heated dust. On the rough-hewn wooden table inside the main cabin, a dinner setting for 3 remained perfectly arranged. Plates held half-eaten food, the remnants of a baked chicken and potatoes, already dry and stiffening in the low humidity. The radio was tuned to a local country station, quietly playing a continuous loop of static-laced music. Most unnerving of all, parked just outside the front gate, was the family's old, reliable pickup truck, idling gently, its tailpipe puffing faint, blue-tinged exhaust into the arid air. The immediate reaction was suspicion of foul play. The complete vacuum of their departure defied logic. Why walk away from a perfectly set dinner and an idling vehicle, leaving behind wallets, cell phones, and car keys? This was not an impulsive departure. It was a sudden severance. The subsequent investigation was resource-intensive due to the remoteness of the location. Every inch of the ranch, which spanned several hundred acres, had to be treated as a potential crime scene. Specialists were brought in, their equipment contrasting sharply with the desolate environment. The early efforts included specialized canine units searching for scent trails, and forensic anthropologists sifting through the cabin for signs of struggle or forced entry. The theory quickly centered on concealment, given the family vanished moments after being inside, and given the idling truck suggested an intention to return immediately. Investigators believed the answer must lie on the property itself. Perhaps in an abandoned well, a remote storage shed, or, most likely, buried. The most expensive phase of the investigation began: the excavation. Heavy machinery, backhoes, bulldozers, and ground-penetrating radar, GPR systems, were brought in across miles of rough dirt roads. The desert landscape was slowly and systematically scarred by trenches, the sound of heavy diesel engines, the grinding of treads, and the constant scrape of metal against dry earth replaced the natural, brittle silence of the desert. Investigators focused on several key areas: the old septic field, the foundations of the outbuildings, and the surrounding network of dry riverbeds, or arroyos, which, when flashed with heavy rains, could quickly shift massive amounts of sediment. For months, the painstaking, dusty work continued. Teams moved thousands of cubic yards of sand and hard-baked soil. Every shift was followed by visual inspection, searching for anomalous soil disturbance or signs of human remains. What they found were geological oddities and sun-bleached artifacts. They found layers of broken ceramic pieces from the ranch's previous occupants, rusted farm implements swallowed by the shifting dunes, and evidence of ancient, long-gone desert fauna. They found endless, shifting sands, fine as flour and hot to the touch, which complicated the GPR readings and made the work excruciatingly slow. The arid environment, which preserves certain evidence perfectly, had offered nothing concerning the family. The exhaustion of resources, both financial and psychological, began to take its toll. The cost of maintaining heavy equipment and specialized personnel in such a remote location was astronomical. After 9 months of intensive effort, months of finding nothing but sand and history, the physical search mandate was reviewed at the state level. There were 0 positive hits, 0 forensic traces, and no further leads to suggest that the family was still on the property, deceased or otherwise. The sudden closure of the investigation was a stark, bureaucratic statement. The excavation stopped mid-trench. The heavy equipment was hauled away, leaving behind massive temporary scars on the land that the wind immediately began working to erase. The case remained open as a missing persons investigation, but the active, labor-intensive search was terminated. The only answer the investigators had was the chilling, paradoxical scene. 3 people had disappeared from the exact moment of their lives, leaving behind an engine that idled until the fuel ran dry, and a dinner table set for a meal that would never be finished. The Rancho Seco mystery was filed away, a testament to how silence, even in the midst of a massive search effort, can become the final, definitive answer. The final two cases highlight a different vector of investigative failure: procedural attrition. They were not defeated by nature or ambiguity, but by the complex, often corrosive machinery of bureaucracy and shifting institutional priorities. Case 4 involves the disappearance of a key witness, Elias Vance, who had provided critical, specific testimony against a powerful figure linked to a sprawling, organized crime syndicate. Vance was not an innocent bystander. He was an insider who had agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for immunity and placement in a protective custody program. When Vance vanished, it was not merely a missing persons case, it was a national security embarrassment.
And an immediate high-stakes criminal investigation.
The implication was clear. The organized crime network had somehow breached the protective perimeter and neutralized the threat he posed. The initial response was surging and overwhelming. Dozens of federal agents were immediately assigned, backed by the full financial weight of the Department of Justice. The investigation operated out of secure, anonymous offices, characterized by the intense sound of secure phone lines and the smell of strong coffee and ozone from high-speed printers. The urgency was palpable, fueled by the professional imperative to locate Vance and the political necessity of proving that the witness protection program was not inherently compromised. For the first 6 weeks, the investigation was a whirlwind of activity: stakeouts, analysis of Vance's highly secure movements before his disappearance, wiretaps, and coordinated raids against low-level syndicate figures to leverage information. The detailed files grew thick almost daily, meticulously documenting every expenditure, every lead, and every perceived threat. However, the organized crime figure against whom Vance was set to testify was shrewd, well-protected, and deeply entrenched. The initial surge of manpower, fueled by adrenaline and immediate crisis funding, failed to yield immediate results. The trail, which involved shell companies and layers of false identities, rapidly cooled. This is where bureaucratic attrition began its slow, inexorable work. As the weeks turned into months, the political urgency faded. A major unrelated domestic terrorism threat arose, drawing key personnel and millions of dollars in earmarked funding toward the new crisis. The federal budget cycle required justification for every continuous expense, and the Elias Vance pursuit, which was hemorrhaging resources with no breakthroughs, began to look less like a priority and more like a drain. The process was insidious. First, the dedicated task force was reduced from 25 agents to 15, then to 7. Key analysts were reassigned to the new priority threat. The secure operational headquarters was moved out of the expensive downtown space and into a more modest, windowless annex on the edge of the city. The lead investigator, burned out and facing immense internal pressure, retired early. The detailed files, once treated with the highest security clearance, began their journey downward. They moved from the active evidence room to the pending status shelf and finally to the permanent storage vault. The investigation was not formally closed in the sense of being solved, but it was indefinitely suspended, a soft closure driven entirely by the shifting funding priorities and the bureaucratic refusal to commit scarce resources to a case that offered diminishing returns. The voluminous files now sit in a dust-laden vault, a procedural failure that silently illustrates how even critical, high-profile cases can wither not from a lack of effort, but from institutional exhaustion. Case 5 presents a similar procedural tragedy, rooted not in shifting priorities, but in the corrosive friction of overlapping authority. A maritime disappearance that occurred near an industrial shipping lane, a highly regulated, intensely busy stretch of water adjacent to a major coastal port. The incident involved a small civilian vessel that disappeared during a heavy fog bank, in a zone notoriously complex due to its proximity to international waters, a national conservation area, and a large commercial port administered by local authority. When the small vessel failed to check in, the initial response was immediate, utilizing specialized Coast Guard cutters and local harbor patrol units. The scene of the search was defined by the metallic clang of containers being moved on shore, the incessant, mournful blasts of foghorns, and the pervasive smell of brine, mixed heavily with oil and diesel exhaust. The gray, choppy water was under constant visual scrutiny, initially backed by high-tech side-scan sonar sweeping the silty bottom. The primary obstacle, however, quickly became the jurisdictional map. The point where the vessel was last tracked was directly on the invisible line where the authority of the National Coast Guard, Federal Law Enforcement and Search Rescue, the State Marine Patrol, State Water Safety and Law Enforcement, and the Municipal Port Authority, Local Maritime Logistics and Security, overlapped. Every piece of evidence collected, a half-submerged life vest, a piece of hull composite, required a chain of custody that often needed the official sign-off of 3 different agencies. Intelligence reports gathered by one agency often contained data that another agency could not legally access without weeks of formal paperwork. Simple decisions, like ordering a specialized deep-water dive team, became mired in meetings determining who would fund the operation, and which jurisdiction held ultimate responsibility for the outcome. The investigation was, in essence, 3 simultaneous, slightly uncoordinated operations, each with its own internal reporting structure and funding stream. The initial surge, robust with manpower and resources, began to slow under the weight of this interagency friction. Energy was sapped not by the difficulty of the search, but by the necessity of internal politics and the constant battle over budgetary allocation. The search teams required fuel, maintenance, and replacement personnel. When the initial 60-day emergency funding window expired, the budgetary pressure intensified. As the Coast Guard helicopter landed heavily, the midday sun illuminated the intense argument between federal and state marine officers concerning the extraordinary cost of the operation. Agency C argued that since the vessel was private, the federal government, Agency A, should cover. Agency C argued that since the vessel was private, the federal government, Agency A, should cover the sonar costs. These weren't petty disagreements. They were existential battles over departmental budgets. Slowly, the vessels used for the search were called back to routine patrol. The specialized dive teams were officially placed back on standby. And the investigators, weary of triplicate reports and cross-departmental memos, began focusing their attention on cases where jurisdiction was clear, and the path to closure was less obstructed. The investigation files, a mountain of duplicated forms, conflicting reports, and meticulously drawn jurisdictional maps, were consolidated and moved to long-term storage, a monument to administrative collapse. The disappearance was never definitively closed, leaving the families with the agonizing uncertainty of whether the individuals were lost to the sea or lost to the labyrinthine bureaucracy that failed to sustain the search effort. The truth, in this case, was consigned to the cold, silent depths, not because of a lack of evidence in the water, but because of the insurmountable weight of the procedural maze on land. These 5 cases, spanning the vastness of the natural world and the tight confines of urban life, illustrate a haunting pattern. The complex machinery of justice, designed for precision and driven by logic, sometimes freezes not from lack of initial effort or commitment, but from the inability to function when faced with absolute, impenetrable ambiguity or overwhelming systemic friction. The men and women who undertook these investigations exhibited remarkable endurance, sifting through pine needles, thermal data, surveillance footage, and tons of desert soil. They did not stop because they were tired of the work. They stopped because the evidentiary trail reached a final, impassable wall. A wall built of vanished forensic data, recanted testimony, geological silence, or the crushing weight of bureaucratic attrition. In the end, what remains is the archive. The massive storage facilities house these cases, not as solutions, but as meticulously detailed records of failure. The paper files, heavy and cold to the touch, document every hopeful lead, every technological deployment, and every ultimately fruitless expenditure. They are the physical remnants of the vanished, the spectral outlines etched forever into the historical record. Silent reminders that sometimes even the most dedicated pursuit cannot pierce the veil of the unknown. The unsettling quiet returns, more profound and absolute than before, serving as the final resting place for the unanswered questions.